Hi, it's Gwyn and welcome back to the Revolver Beatles channel. I know it's been a few weeks, but let's dive straight into a subject which perhaps doesn't get the attention that it should. Okay, so first off, a question. When we talk about Beatlemania, what usually comes to mind? Screaming fans packing out streets, frenzied concerts, the Ed Sullivan Show, mop-top haircuts and chart records that probably will never be broken. But there is something we don't talk about enough. How did the fans back in the day actually keep up with the Beatles? There was no internet, no social media, no YouTube, no instant 24-hour news. Well, one of the answers to that question was a little black and white magazine called the Beatles Monthly book, and looked something like this. These were incredibly important to fans at the time, and now as a historical artefact. So today I want to talk about why this magazine was so important, how it documented the Beatles' rise in real time and who the people behind it were, because without them a huge part of the Beatles' history might have been lost. So what exactly was the Beatles Book Monthly? Well, it first came out in August 1963, which, as you can imagine, is just about the most perfect timing possible. The band had already exploded in the UK. Please Please Me was a smash hit. She Loves You was absolutely everywhere. And suddenly everyone wanted to know everything about John, Paul, George and Ringo. And not just their music. Fans wanted to know, what were they like as people? What were they doing day to day? What was coming next? That's where the magazine stepped in. What it wasn't was a gossip rag. It wasn't full of wild rumours or made-up nonsense. It was officially approved, carefully written and surprisingly informative. And just as importantly to their young fan base, it included lots of current photographs that were exclusively presented to the readership. Think of it as the closest thing to a monthly Beatles newsletter, but straight from the inside. Here we need to meet Sean O'Mahony, also known as Johnny Dean. Before we go any further, we really need to pause and talk properly about Sean O'Mahony, because without him, the Beatles Book Monthly simply wouldn't exist. Mahoney was an Irish-born journalist and publisher who had already been producing pop and fan magazines before the Beatles ever became a national obsession. So he wasn't some random fan who lucked into access. He knew exactly how the music press worked and, more importantly, how to speak to a young readership without talking down to them. O'Mahony was already publishing Beat Monthly magazine when he was hooked by the spell of Please Please Me and approached Brian Epstein to produce a Beatles-only monthly publication. When he launched the Beatles Book Monthly, O'Mahony made a very smart decision. He didn't put his real name on the cover. Instead, he wrote under the pen name Johnny Dean. But why? Well, because Johnny Dean sounded a bit more approachable, friendly, like someone the fans could trust, and that was absolutely intentional. As Johnny Dean, O'Mahony created a very specific voice. He wrote as if he was one of the fans, excited, supportive, genuinely impressed, but he was also incredibly careful with facts. He double-checked information, avoided rumours, and he never tried to manufacture drama. That balance is one of the main reasons the magazine gained trust so quickly. Fans trusted him, parents trusted him, and crucially, Brian Epstein trusted him. Epstein understood that Johnny Dean wasn't trying to sensationalise the band or exploit them. He was helping to shape a stable, positive narrative during a time when Beatlemania easily could have spun out of control. His relationship with Brian Epstein was absolutely key in understanding the success to the magazine. Brian Epstein gave O'Mahony controlled access, tour schedules, recording updates, official photographs and verified information. In return, Johnny Dean respected boundaries. He didn't pry into the band's private lives, he didn't speculate about conflicts, and he didn't stir up any controversy. That restraint might sound a bit boring today, but in the early 60s, it was exactly what the Beatles needed. The magazine became a pressure valve, a place where fans could feel close to the band without the band being overwhelmed. One of O'Mahony's most important roles was image protection. This was done subtly. Through his writing, he consistently reinforced certain ideas. The Beatles worked incredibly hard. They took their music seriously, they respected their fans, and they hadn't let the fame go to their heads. This mattered enormously at a time when pop music was still seen as disposable and dangerous by some parts of the establishment. O'Mahony helped legitimise the Beatles, not just as idols, but as professionals. And here's something telling about Sean O'Mahony. He never tried to turn himself into a celebrity. He didn't insert himself into the narrative. He didn't make the magazine about him. Neither did he chase attention. And that's rare, and it's part of why the magazine has aged so well. The focus was always on the Beatles, the music and the fans. Even today, when historians look back at the Beatles Book Monthly, Johnny Dean's voice feels remarkably measured and sincere. After the original run ended in 1969, O'Mahony didn't disappear. He remained involved in Beatles-related publishing and played a role in later revivals of the Beatles book, which shifted from real-time reporting to historical documentation. He also launched the ever-popular Record Collector magazine, still running to this day. At this point, his role changed from chronicler to curator, and that's important because it shows that O'Mahony understood the significance of what he had created. He knew this magazine wasn't just nostalgia, it was an archive. So how should we remember Sean O'Mahony? Well, not as a superfan, not as a publicist, but as custodian of Beatles history. He helped create a safe, trusted space between the band and their audience during one of the most intense periods of fame ever experienced. Without Johnny Dean and the Beatles book, fans would have relied much more on the tabloids. Rumours would have spread faster, and the historical record would be far thinner. He didn't just report Beatlemania, he helped stabilise it. Sean O'Mahony rarely gets mentioned in the same breath as many other Beatle figures, and that's a shame. While he wasn't on the stage or in the studio, he still played a vital role in shaping how the Beatles were understood by millions of fans across the world. And sometimes the people who shape the history most are the ones who know when to stay out of the spotlight. So back to the magazine itself. Timing was absolutely everything, and one of the things that makes this magazine so special is when it existed. It ran right through the heart of Beatlemania, from early 1963 to the very end of the 60s. So every issue is like a snapshot where the Beatles were at that moment in time. Early on, they were still very much portrayed as a hard-working Liverpool band who couldn't quite believe their luck. There's a lot of talk about touring, recording singles, and just keeping up with the demand. Then, as the years go on, you can actually feel the shift. More time in the studio, less touring, more talk about albums as complete works, more focus on individual personalities. You're watching the Beatles grow up, month by month. This wasn't written with hindsight, and this is really important. The Beatles Book Monthly wasn't written decades later by historians. This story wasn't filtered through nostalgia and myth-making. It was happening in real time. No one knew how it'd end. No one knew how big the band would ultimately become. That's what makes it such a powerful historical document today. You're seeing the story unfold as it happens, with all the uncertainty, excitement, and sometimes confusion that comes with it. Now, Brian Epstein didn't write for the magazine, but to be honest, his influence is everywhere. He understood that image mattered, especially in the early 1960s, when pop music still made a lot of adults very nervous. The Beatles Book Monthly helped reinforce the idea that the Beatles were polite, professional, hard-working, grateful for their success. It reassured parents while still exciting the fans. And because Epstein trusted Johnny Dean, the magazine became a safe place, a place where fans could get close to the band without crossing lines. Let's talk about the photos for a second. Today we are drowning in images of the Beatles. Back then, not so much. So when a new issue of the Beatles Book Monthly came out, those photos were everything. Studio shots, backstage moments, film set photos, travel shots at airports and hotels. These images help fans feel connected, like they were getting a glimpse behind the curtain, but they still kept that sense of mystery intact. And honestly, some of these photos are now amongst the most iconic images of the band. For that, there is a huge debt to be paid to the magazine's primary photographer, Leslie Bryce, whose images really led the narrative. One of the favourite parts of the Beatles Book Monthly is the fan letters section, and some of those letters are amazing. Fans asking what kind of food the Beatles liked, wondering whether or not they practised, fans declaring their undying love to the Beatles. All sets a snapshot in time. There was also a popular pen pal section too. The magazine never talked down to the fans. It answered questions seriously, sometimes with a touch of humour, but always with kindness. And reading those letters now is kind of emotional because you're hearing directly from people living through Beatlemania, not remembering it, but experiencing it. As the Beatles changed, so did the magazine. By the mid to late 60s, things started to feel quite different. The Beatles had stopped touring, the music gets more experimental, and the band members become more individual. And the Beatles Book Monthly quietly adapts. There's more talk about the studio as an instrument, more respect given to albums as art, more acknowledgement that this isn't just a pop phenomenon anymore, it's something bigger. What's impressive is that the magazine never panics about these changes, it helps fans understand them instead. Also, a quick heads up to some other contributors. Tony Barrow, Mal Evans and Neil Aspinall all used to contribute regularly with their inside story. In December 1969, the original run of the Beatles Book Monthly came to an end with issue number 77. By then, the band was effectively over, and the final issues have this really understated, almost gentle tone. There's no drama, no sensationalism, just a quiet understanding that something massive has come to a close. And honestly, that feels quite appropriate. The story, however, doesn't quite end there. The Beatles Book Monthly was revived a number of years later, not as a fan update, obviously, but as a historical publication. By then, it becomes something else entirely. It wasn't just a magazine anymore, it was a primary source. Writers, historians and hardcore fans started treating it like a monthly diary of the Beatles' career, because that is essentially what it was. For us second-generation fans, it provided an enthralling glimpse in the rear-view mirror into the 1960s, as well as providing contemporary Beatles news. Mark Lewison taking the helm for many years and keeping us up to date on all things fab. So why should we still care about the Beatles Book Monthly today? Well, because it shows us something we don't always think about. The Beatles didn't just happen. Their story was told, shaped and shared month by month through things like this magazine. It helped fans feel included, and it helped control the chaos of Beatlemania. It also preserved a version of the Beatles that was human, hard-working and real. Without it, our understanding of the band, especially in those early years, would be far poorer. So, if you've ever owned a copy of the Beatles Book Monthly, or you've seen one at a record fair, or just online, now you know why it matters. So if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like or subscribe for more deep Beatles history, and let me know in the comments what you think of the Beatles book. What are your other favourite Beatles magazines or fanzines even? Because sometimes the best way to understand music history isn't just by listening to the records, it's by reading the story as it was being written. That's all for now. I'll see you next time. Until then, bye for now.